Elizabeth, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Hi, Umesh. Hi, everybody.
It's been a good day so far. It's been full of content, excellent content. Good to see you. Thank you for coming on. And I know that you've got your guests already lined up. I don't want to burn up your time. Thank you, Elizabeth. You've got a fabulous session called taking a deep dive into state and local cybersecurity needs. You've got a power panel going with Elaine Nicholson, Chief Privacy Officer at the City of Austin, Daniel Hankins, who is the relatively new as the state cybersecurity officer, but welcome, Daniel, and Michael Wyatt will be joining you too. So with that, I want to just turn it over to you and thank you for running this panel, and then I'll be back at the end of this panel.
Okay, thank you, Umesh. I'm excited. So as Umesh said, my name is Elizabeth Rogers. Welcome to our panel topic about taking a deeper dive into the statewide and local cybersecurity needs. I wish this panel had been available when I worked for state government. I think a brief review of my background will help frame today's topic and show how important it is to all of us. About 10 years ago, I was appointed as the first Chief Privacy Officer in Texas state government, following one of the top 5 data breaches in Texas history. Working with my brothers and sisters in information security and information technology, along with Mike Wyatt, who is one of our panelists, we created the first official privacy division and wrote the first written security incident response plan for the agency I worked for. Since leaving that role, I have been in the private sector to help organizations both in the public sector and the private sector to prevent breaches and to respond to breaches. Let's fast forward to today and look at a brief review of the current state. In the last 2 years, the Texas public sector has been in the news as often, if not more often, than the private sector. Starting in August of 2019, Texas made nationwide headlines because of ransomware attacks in the New Front attack, and that affected 22 cities in the state. This year, we have seen 2 state agencies and Tyler Technologies suffer from very sophisticated ransomware attacks. In addition to the BlueLeaks breach, several local jurisdictions have also been affected. So this current state is becoming an even bigger concern because ransomware gangs have developed a new kind of Texas two-step. They're demanding ransom with no guarantee the data will be returned, while also threatening to publish this sensitive stolen data. Despite the state having implemented laws and Senate bills that aim for more robust cybersecurity protection within state government and Texas businesses, there are still breaches occurring daily because of ransomware. The right course of action? It's for every organization to understand the extent of the cyber hygiene it takes to protect their systems, but often local and state governments do not have the resources for the level of protection they need. Joining me today to discuss how we can bridge that gap in the supply of resources and the demand of resources are 3 expert panelists. Please join me in welcoming, I hope that Daniel has joined. Daniel Hankins, good afternoon, Daniel. He is the Cybersecurity Coordinator for the state of Texas. And Mike Wyatt, as I earlier mentioned, one of my chief wingmen in the creation of the first privacy division, who now serves as the state of Texas risk advisory leader and cyber partner for Deloitte. Elaine Nicholson is anticipated to join us. She is currently the chief privacy officer for the city of Texas. And so until we have Elaine join us, I want to just begin. Elaine?
Hi.
Hi, perfect timing. You missed your own introduction, but let me reintroduce Elaine Nicholson as the privacy rock star for the City of Austin. And we are going to begin. I think you're an appropriate person to start with, Elaine, because you're the person on the panel that really has a demand for resources from a cybersecurity standpoint. So why don't we spend some time with you discussing some of the challenges that a Texas city may have to deal with, especially in this period of indefinite work from home circumstance.
Sure. And let me give my usual disclaimer, which you've probably already given for all of us, but I'll do it again, that the viewpoints that I expressed today are my own, and they're not necessarily representative of the City of Austin or any other entity or organization. So I think the cities are unique in the sense that they have their organizational structures are very vast, and there are a lot of different business models or business type models throughout the cities. So for example, the City of Austin, I think we have over 50 different offices and organizations, and each of those offices and organizations have different types of, if you will, business models within them. And so we're looking at a lot of different statutory or regulatory entities that may govern those different departments, as well as the fact that all of them are maintaining data, right? And it's the security and the different security levels that are required to be maintained for those different departments all the time. So as far as working from home, we're looking at securing all of those different departments and that infrastructure, right? So it's kind of a, I guess you'd say it's a vast maintenance of a new environment that we didn't anticipate. No one anticipated. And it's making sure that we are adequately addressing those new areas that we're now subject to vulnerabilities because we have so many people working from home. And a lot of those people, no offense to them, but they are now our vulnerabilities, right? Because of their operation. And I would also say, money is an issue as well. There's a lot of money being diverted because of COVID. There's a lot of revenue that's decreased at the city level because of the lack of people traveling or people spending money or events being canceled. So most cities are dealing with the loss of revenue, the diversion of funds, as well as new competing interest. Some people have a hiring freeze. So that rolls into the talent, right? The skills and the people you can hire. And if you have a hiring freeze, you're not hiring anyone. And cities are already competing in the market for talent. There's already a lack of skills, a lack of specialty skills in the cybersecurity area. So we were already having a difficult time filling these positions. And now because of the diversion of funds or because of the lack of funding that we have, because of a hiring freeze, potentially, then we can't fill those areas. So three areas: the vast organization, the people, and money, I would say.
Okay. I guess also in connection with the money, even if you had the money, under normal circumstances, most cities have procurement processes, right? So how does that also impact your challenges or Texas City challenges?
I think a lot of people knew that they had an emergency procurement process. I don't think a lot of people were aware of what those requirements were, right? The statutory requirements for an emergency purchase. And I do hope that after this, a lot more people will have created a process or procedure for qualifying some purchases or pre-qualifying some purchases as emergency purchases so that they can facilitate a faster access to what they need in response. Of course, you can't always anticipate everything. The other thing I think would be another proper response would be to evaluate contingency contracts. So, you may have someone on standby in the event of this. We'll have your services to help with this cyber attack, or we'll have your services to help with this ransomware attack, or something of that nature, just to better prepare for what we're not prepared for.
Right. So that's a great overview of what Texas cities are challenged with right now. And I know, Mike, you deal with multiple types of organizations, both in the public and the private sector. But just to give us your perspective from the commercial standpoint, are these the same kind of challenges you're hearing about, or what type of challenges are you hearing?
We are certainly seeing similar challenges in the private sector. One difference is that when attacks happen, they don't necessarily become above the fold news, like with public sector. With public sector, there is a level of expected transparency and the need to communicate in a vast number of stakeholders, including the residents of the state, that need to know about these things. And in the private sector, that's not the case. So though you don't see the headlines, that doesn't mean the attacks are not happening. I will say this, that with state government, we find that 2 to 3% of the IT budget at the state level is for cybersecurity. That is far less than in the private sector. 7 to 9% is quite common as a high across industry average. And we see 10 to 14% of total IT spend with certain industries, such as financial services. So I would say that the challenges are similar. There's a little bit more flexibility for pay scale for talent, but you just may not be aware that these challenges are happening unless they're the very largest that become public knowledge.
Right. So from the standpoint of both Elaine representing cities at the local level and Mike being involved in the commercial sector, Daniel, your role is unique. You have to know about challenges and threats and resources in both. So that's part of your role as Texas Cybersecurity Coordinator. But why don't you spend some time talking a little bit about exactly what your role involves?
Sure. So unlike the Chief Information Security Officer for the state who I work for, my role is to actually bridge that gap between the state on one side, private entities on the other. So kind of like a triangle, because the state provides a lot of services to state agencies, but we don't necessarily provide them to local entities before now. And at the same time, the state contracts with a lot of private sector. For example, I work with Mike almost every day. But we don't necessarily connect the private sector with local entities either. And they all have unique tools and great tools that would be useful for everybody. So my role is kind of almost playing that information broker. Hey, Mike has this amazing tool. He can help you out, Elaine. Elaine, Mike needs this amazing thing. You have it. Why don't you go talk to Mike? And in that sense, as the state, I'm trying to help. In the meantime, I'm also trying to, when let's say Elaine gets a cyber breach, she can call me up and I'll make those connections for her. Or we have a legal department that will try and help out their legal department if they need assistance, things like that. We're just basically trying to act like that spray foam filler for all the cracks and fill everything up. Super high level. I don't, want to monopolize this stuff.
No, that's a great just metaphor to describe how you're available to everyone at once. I know that in the last few years, there's been a new development that, as we mentioned in preparation, you get to wear all these different titles and have all these different roles, but you still get one salary. That's just how I remember being in government. So now you're also helping to administer the Texas ISAO. And not everyone in attendance today is familiar with that, and they probably should be. So would you mind spending a few minutes just talking about what that is and what resources are available?
Sure. The Texas ISAO, or Information Sharing and Analysis Organization, is a coalition of not only DIR, but we've partnered with universities and a couple private entities such as Deloitte. And what we're trying to do is, once again, the information sharing. This university has this great tool. Why don't we make it available to the entire state? Or, for example, Cyber Houston has these amazing website tools. Why don't we advertise that Cyber Houston has these tools available to the whole state for people who don't know that they're there? And then we have plans to actually move forward and start doing things like active threat analysis. We have a threat reporting form where if you're absolutely stuck, shoot us an email, send us a threat report, give us a call. We try and help out. Or if we've had people contact us, they've received information about threats to somebody that has a similar name. So I'm just making this one up off the top of my head. I'm not saying this actually happened, but let's say you have a university health type system, you get a threat to a university health system, somebody mistakes it for you and it's not university health system, it's university health services. We'll reach out and we'll try and contact them. And it doesn't really matter to us if you're a public or a private entity at that point. We want to help you out. And while there are legal limitations on what we can do, depending on what type of organization you are. So for example, I can't walk into Mike's office and help him recover from a ransomware attack because he's a private entity. But I can, hey, Mike, we do know about these things. Perhaps you should do this in the future. Elaine calls me about a ransomware attack. I can walk into her office because she's a government entity and we can actually help her out as much as possible. And then Mike was hitting on the education portion. One of our big initiatives is there is a cybersecurity workforce gap. It's massive. I'm sure Mike and Elaine could tell you all about it. We're trying to partner up with companies and public entities and anybody who will actually listen to us and get more education opportunities out there and make cybersecurity more knowledgeable around the state. So we have a lot of entities out there, both private and public, that their cybersecurity is amazing. I mean, they put the state to shame. But then we have other entities where the hamburger joint down the street probably has better cybersecurity than they do. And we want to raise the baseline for everybody at that point. And if we can get people who work cybersecurity to help train those other people and even introduce them to cybersecurity, we're helping everybody get a little bit better.
Even in the legal industry, we're having a problem with the pipeline of people who are really qualified legal professionals who know both sides, who know the technical side and the legal side. So I hear that, and I know that that cities are struggling with that as well. So with that, Elaine, speaking of a need for resources, what resources does DIR offer that you feel are valuable to cities, and what are some of the key things that cities need to have in place?
So I think probably one of the things we utilize the most from DIR would be their contract and cooperative agreements. It's just our ability to contract through DIR to make purchases, and it saves the city arguably time and money, as opposed to going through our normal procurement processes that are designed either statutorily or internally with additional requirements. It goes ahead, it provides the vendor with a baseline of expectation for service and for security that expedites the process. We've also used some of their web-based resources, I guess you would say, including a data classification policy that they have on the web, and molded that to fit the city's needs. We, of course, use we have an open line of communication with them. We share information and threats. Threat awareness, I guess, would be the big answer. I'm forgetting the privacy training. So DIR offers, now there's a statutorily mandated cybersecurity training, and DIR offers a website of vendors who have been pre-screened that are available to now provide that training for cities and other governmental entities that are now required to do that on an annual basis.
Okay, that sounds like a lot of resources are available at DIR. I know those didn't exist before. They were developing and they've become so mature. And so I know, Mike, like you helped me and our team write a roadmap for information security 10 years ago. And you've stayed involved in state government agencies, helping them along. So maybe since we've had like a 360 discussion of how everyone uses DIR, why don't you spend a little bit of time talking about how you, in your role as statewide risk advisory leader, how you work with DIR and isao?
Sure, thank you so much. So the first area of collaboration is our cyber detect and respond portal. We have a no fee based threat intelligence portal that has the latest information on vulnerabilities as well as the latest information on threats. And yes, those are two different categories or topic areas. We share that with DIR. We also share that with the multi-state information sharing and analysis centers, MSISAC. So that's one area. Another is that we serve on several state contracts. So we were chosen as the vendor of choice for Texas.gov, and as part of that, there is a EMFA, I think is what we're calling the program, multi-factor authentication that is being consumed by state agencies, and so that's another way that we work with DIR. A number of years ago, I actually had the opportunity to work on the policy committee that helped with the update for the Texas Administrative Code 202, which is the cybersecurity code for the state, and helped with the framework that DIR uses. They've of course evolved it a lot and improved it a lot since that time. But anyway, I've enjoyed the opportunity to work with DIR and support the organizations of the state.
So if you were going to share how the government and the private sector would go about learning about the availability of these resources, how would they be able to find out?
You certainly can contact me, because sometimes on our Deloitte Net website, there's a lot of information. We're a pretty large organization. And if you search for cyber risk services, you'll find a lot of helpful information. But in lieu of that, you certainly can contact me directly.
Okay, and go to the website or contact you.
Yep.
And so, Daniel, this has evolved so much, like I said, since I have been involved. Now that you're in a full-time role and there's still evolution going on, are you aware of anything you can share publicly about any expanded resources that could be available both to the state and local government and the private sector?
If you go to isao.texas.gov, and it's free for everybody in Texas. In fact, it's free for everybody in the world at this point. You can sign up, and we send out email lists. There's 25 email lists now that you can pick down to your actual individualized sector of what critical services you are. In addition, we send out notices, say when we've actually worked with Deloitte Threat Portal and Deloitte's threat team on, we have this new alert, we have this new threat. We'll send those threats out as well. We share speaking opportunities with people that we know want to speak. We have lots of our partner members coming to talk on talks like this one, for example. We are actually working with Cyber Houston on how to engage closer with Cyber Houston and start sharing all of Cyber Houston's information out with the rest of the state. We've worked closely with the city of Austin and Yang over there and all the others. They contact us a lot and they share a lot of good information with us. And we just, like I mentioned, kind of like that information broker, we're just trying to get it out there. But the very first step is sign up for our mailing list, because that's our main way to get things out at this point. And then eventually we're going to get a nice fancy portal like what Deloitte's is and build it all up and everything. But right now we're at that email stage. And then if you email us back or you fill out the threat reporting form, the entire CISO team at DIR, although originally we were focused only on state agencies, we have shifted towards local governments and private entities a bit. So if you email us, the entire team is watching those email boxes and we're ready to help and respond.
That's an excellent resource. So you're doing a lot of sending information out, creating awareness, creating a culture of awareness. Are there any opportunities for entities like cities or state agencies to send information in to you all? And if so, can you talk about that?
We have an email address, isao@dir.texas.gov, that reaches us, or the threat form. It's right now we're in what we're calling phase 1 of the isao build out, which is more of the push. And it's taking a little bit for people to realize that, yes, we are the state, but we're not here to mandate things to you. We're just here to help. And people are starting to break down those barriers a little bit, and they're starting to actually come back to us with information. And I think as word of mouth kind of gets out there saying, hey, DIR is not going to push down legislation. We don't have that authority. And they're not going to mandate that you must do this, because we don't have that authority over private entities or local governments either. They're just here to help. Hopefully more people start to spread the word that, yes, we probably could let DIR know, and then DIR will come out and we'll let everybody know if you let us. If you don't want us to tell everybody about something, we won't. But as I mentioned before, we're just here to help and to try and help you make connections with whatever you need as well.
Excellent. And I know you need as many PSAs as you can, and so I know this is helpful. I remember struggling myself to get the word out. So when Umesh and I were talking about a year ago about this panel, he had a very strong passion for making people aware that he would like Cyber Houston to support the entire state. And unfortunately, he's not on the panel, but in what ways have you all been discussing that Cyber Houston can support those who you serve as well?
We're kind of treating Cyber Houston like a miniature version of an ISO that handles the Houston area. So as Umesh has his, I think it's bi-weekly events. I see the guest speaker things pop up in my email box all the time. As he has those, we're going to start sending those out, and vice versa. We have a lot of events that other people have. So Mike might have a guest speaker, or Elaine might have a guest speaker. We add those to our mailing list and we send those out as well. And we're going to start sending those back to him to share it with Cyber Houston, just getting that two-way information flow really working.
Okay, that'll be very helpful. And I know I'm not going to put anyone on the spot for their own organization, but if you, Elaine, and you, Mike, could create a wish list for resources, realizing that right now both the private sector and the public sector are looking for anything that they don't have to pay for, especially with budgets that have been cut, staff that have been cut due to the situation, the pandemic. Right now, if we are in this situation for the indefinite future, what would be on a wish list for Texas cities, or Michael, in your case, Texas businesses, whoever wants to go first?
There's a couple of things. When you take a workforce that is used to working in a four walls office environment, and you have the defense in depth of firewalls and intrusion detection and so forth, and then you take that entire workforce and move them to their homes, that creates a number of challenges for public sector and private sector alike. And so if I could just wave a magic wand, and every connection from a home office back to an organization to have strong authentication or multi-factor authentication, that would go a long way to helping reduce the amount of successful ransomware attacks. That's one particular piece that I think is important. There's a lot of other things that are important. I think the other piece that we find too often is that organizations oftentimes figure out what they're going to do when they have an incident during the incident. And that's a terrible time to try to figure out what to do. So by going through tabletop exercises or simulations or war games, you'll hear all three of those terms, with executive leadership, head of the organization on down, the legal side, the operations side, the IT side, bringing those teams together and thinking through, well, what happens if we have a severe situation? When do we bring in outside counsel? When do we activate incident response with our vendor partners? Having that figured out in advance, will result in so much a better outcome. I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey. It's not necessarily what happens to you, it's how you respond to it. And you do have choice in how to respond, and that preparation can make all the difference.
Elaine, I know you're not speaking on behalf of the city of Austin, but having your experience in a local government, what do you think you would have in common with other Texas cities as far as a wish list?
Mike just said in the sense of try to have some sort of policies or procedures in place for a cyber attack or ransomware, or at least have something baked into your continuity of operations or emergency operation plan, just like he was saying, so that you can kind of at least agree on what's a breach and what's an incident and who you're going to contact and when you're going to contact that person and who's going to make the decisions and at what level. And then kind of circling back to the emergency procurement stuff from earlier, when you're going to need to make an emergency purchase and what that process is going to look like. And then I guess also, if you have it, know your cyber liability policy, right? Know your cyber liability insurance coverage and what you need to do for that policy. And then most importantly, and again, as Mike was saying, since everyone is working from home, training and awareness, make sure everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, train all your internal people and also your third-party vendors, since we're outsourcing a lot nowadays, and make at least the vendors who are somewhat vulnerable to a cyber attack.
Yeah,
if you don't mind me jumping in, I'm going to reiterate what they both said. Entities that have a plan, even if it's a napkin plan, do so much better in a cyber attack. In fact, in any kind of disaster, than those that haven't even started having a plan. And if you can get your executive buy-in on that, you are light years ahead of somebody who's never been at that level. Because when I've walked into cyber incidents and those that didn't have a plan and hadn't engaged their executives at all, and you walk in and their executive is completely lost and had never even realized it could happen, those people were in a world of hurt compared to the other ones that had at least talked to them and said, hey, we need to be prepared in case something like that happens. And just that simple one-line sentence can open up a whole new world for you.
right. Well, I know all of this is so critical because being prepared for a breach and effectively responding to a breach can save millions of dollars following a ransomware attack. But I want to shift for just a few minutes to talk about a non-emergency cybersecurity focus, such as the day-to-day activities of a state and local government related to data sharing and other areas of risk where people aren't as focused maybe as they are as on cyber and data breaches. In your role, Daniel, have you experienced any demand for resources related to just the ordinary day-to-day activities that create risk that are short of a data breach?
Yeah, we see so much. For data sharing, I mainly deal with the cybersecurity stuff, but we do have data portals and whatnot. And we've also seen the flip side of that, which is the cybersecurity risk. I'm going to be honest here, Mike and Elaine are probably a little bit more knowledgeable in that area than I am. But yeah, in general, we see a lot of data sharing. We see a lot of people who just assume that this data is basically free for all. And then when this data sharing happens, the next person shares on the data. And then the person after that shares on the data. And before you know it, you don't have any control over where that data went. So the Blue Leaks example, I'm not even sure when it happened at this point, COVID time. But in the Blue Leaks example, some of the data that we saw out there wasn't shared by the person that eventually ended up leaking it, or even the person before that. It had been passed through so many hands that by the time it leaked, people weren't even aware that that data was out there. So you do have to keep in mind, when I'm sharing this data out, I need some controls around it. I need to make sure that Yes, privacy is still in place for it. Medical data, make sure it's only going to the people that are allowed to access it. And then make sure that they're not turning around and behind your back sharing it out or think it's okay to share it. You have to have those very strict controls, and you have to make it very clear to them, you cannot give this out or you can give this out.
Mike or Elaine, do either of you have anything to contribute in that topic?
Either way, the world has changed, right? We've moved from where we wanted to be open and transparent and share everything and let everybody know everything and see everything, to where, now we're concerned about identity theft and people having access to information and how vulnerable we are when people have access to information. So it's it's definitely a different world that we're dealing with now, as far as an evaluation of the data. And I think it's a constant evaluation of the data and of the business model and the business practice. And it's, why are we taking this? Do we need this? Is there another way we can justify the business need here besides taking this piece of PII or HPI or personally identifiable information or health information as it relates to an individual? And it's more of a concern when you're sharing data, because again, it's, what do they want the data for, and what are they going to do with the data? And, are we essentially maybe sharing data that wouldn't otherwise be subject to a Public Information Act request? Not to take us into the Public Information Act, but for governmental entities, we are subject to open records, as it used to be called, the Public Information Act. So almost everything we do is public, with the carved out exceptions that the legislature has made. So it's in the Attorney General's office. So it's kind of it's even more important that we review things from a business process standpoint, because if we are taking it, then we have to protect it and secure it. So I think for the data sharing agreements, it's an evaluation of, what are we sharing the data for? Why are we sharing it? What is the data? And is there any risk with sharing the data for us?
Yes.
I think, just to add a little bit to those points, so often organizations don't really have a good handle on the sensitivity of the data in their systems, especially when they have a big data lake or a big information warehouse where there's been a lot of different feeds that have been consolidated, which is great for reporting. It's terrible for protecting, sensitive information. And so Elaine mentioned earlier data classification. It is not fun work. It's not the cool cybersecurity work, but it is so necessary to identify the assets that are meaningful in the organization that house the sensitive data, and then making sure you add the protections around those systems, because you're not going to probably be able to protect everything evenly. And even if you were to, there might be so much user friction that you might have a rebellion on your hands. But knowing what needs to be protected and how it needs to be protected and what needs to happen from a governance perspective is really something that I think we do need to talk more about, especially with when it becomes a legislative issue. And I'm on Governor Abbott's Privacy Protection Advisory Council, looking at CCPA in California, GDPR in Europe, and other states that are beginning to really think about the importance of privacy. Getting a handle on the data and how it's shared, especially with third parties, is just really critically important.
Right. I mean, this is an era, like starting in 2020, I think we're going to see an even greater evolution in information privacy practices, going hand in glove with information security practices. So way ahead of the breach, just getting, like you point out, Michael, a handle on your assets, your hardware, your software, plus the data, and knowing where they live will go a long way to prevent the actual data breach from occurring. Another big challenge I've seen with my clients is, how do you work with the federal government? So, they are there to support state and local government. The way I've worked with them is the FBI gets involved in a ransomware gang, because they're a known gang that threatens law enforcement agencies. In fact, that was the last big breach I worked with. But many municipalities and state government agencies don't know how to work with federal government or when to work with federal agencies. I'd like to just open that question to all of you, open up the whole panel to talk about ideas and takeaways for the audience about when and how and what agencies to work with when that need arises.
I'll go first. In my opinion, if you have a cybersecurity attack, and this is just my opinion in general, you should let law enforcement know. Because at least that way it's on their radar. Even if they didn't take something that is super precious to you or meets a certain monetary threshold, if you let them know, it goes into their catalog of we've seen these attacks and we're seeing these attacks, and it helps build a better profile of the attacker. And then even if it is a bunch of minor attacks, you may be helping prevent the next big attack. Because we often see them prodding smaller targets before they hit the big one. So if you lose anything of value in a cyber attack, let law enforcement know. The worst that'll happen is law enforcement will go, this does not meet our thresholds. But at least you tried at that point. And like I said, that's my opinion, not DIR speaking here, but.
Michael or Elaine, have you all or either of you had experience in using the resources available from DHS or CISA in either preventing or responding to breaches, or are you aware of other cities and what kind of best practices are out there?
I can say that from having presented with other colleagues, I'm aware that there are specific FBI units available or organizations available to provide assistance specifically to cities in the event that it's needed.
Yeah, I think that knowing who to contact. Well, first off, check with counsel before phoning law enforcement. It's always a good first step. Get permission from the tower first. But knowing who the cyber lead is for your area is really important. And I would also say that in addition to FBI, Secret Service gets involved when money is involved. When there's a money fraud situation, oftentimes they'll engage as well. So one thing I would say from an expectation standpoint, I've worked with a couple of states where the FBI has had to come in and help with big, major public breaches. Don't expect a lot of bilateral information sharing. They're going to collect a lot of information. It's going to be treated very close to the vest as they do their investigations and figure out if it's tied to larger criminal activity or nation state activities. And so I know that I've had some public sector clients get a little frustrated that they're not getting anything back. That's okay. If there's information to be shared back, they will certainly engage. But you're not going to get ongoing updates on the investigation as you might hope to have.
Yeah, they'll get you an update eventually. But like Mike said, it may take a while. But when you do get an update, we've gotten some. They are very thorough. It's pretty impressive. And if you're a state or local agency and you don't know who to contact, give us a call. We have contacts with federal government. We will engage everybody underneath the sun that needs to be engaged for you.
That's outstanding to know, especially from the standpoint of like I said, so many agencies or counties or cities really don't know who to call. So is Infragard something that people should be aware of? And when you mentioned regional level of contacts, are they there as a resource, or would you say that the FBI itself is the first point of contact?
If you're talking about an entity in Texas, give me a call or give us a call. So we have a very thorough incident response playbook. We have mapped out, if you are XYZ type of entity, who we should contact next, and the special criteria. For example, in Texas, doesn't matter what size entity you are, if you've lost more than 250 records of sensitive personal information, you need to let the Attorney General's office know. So we have that built into our workflows. If you mention that, our breach is this big, we will tell you, you have to let them know within X amount of time. I don't remember the time right off the top of my head.
So
and
30 days.
And we'll go ahead and we'll bring in extra resources for you. If you're a private entity, honestly, we can tell you some of it and we will tell you some of it, but then we might also point you off to people like Mike at Deloitte and say, hey, Mike, you can probably help them a little bit better than we can, because we do focus more on the state and local entities.
Right. I think, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, my sense with Infragard is that if you have a business that's in one of the critical infrastructure categories that's not public sector, it could be a useful resource for you. I've attended a number of the sessions here in Austin, and they have really good guest speakers, and it's good networking. And so probably good someone in your information security organization to at least explore Infragard.
Right. I think that's an excellent point. Is there seem to be more connected in the private sector. And I did want to highlight what Daniel pointed out as far as all the resources available where he is the broker. DIR is not an investigative agency. It doesn't have a forensic, itself. It is not a forensic investigator for any of these state agency or local breaches. It is mainly a resource and a broker. And so it's important to make sure we're not sending any messages where Daniel's going to be overwhelmed with calls after this presentation. One point too, I think along the lines of, from a standpoint of being in the role of Elaine or, Mike advising these entities in dealing with law enforcement, they often don't want to be known. They don't want for the public to know they have this role, correct? I mean, at least in my experience, they want to stay behind the scenes so they collect evidence on these gangs and ultimately, hopefully, put them in jail. Any other takeaways on, what are best practices when state agencies or local governments are dealing with law enforcement as a resource?
They don't mind being known that they do that work. They don't want to be known that they're investigating a particular incident. So we've dealt with the FBI, it's Secret quiet. Service, and everybody else. And while sometimes my experience the news with law crews enforcement capture is that generally they're there, they don't really want the malicious actors to realize that they're also being investigated. It's kind of like when you get hit by ransomware, you don't want to share your ransomware screen because then the malicious actor might be monitoring and realize that, oh, this is who we got. And at the flip side, sometimes they're like, oh, we knew who we got, but now they just made it public and they removed the keys. So yeah, and also don't expect law enforcement to help you rebuild it. There's sometimes the expectation that law enforcement is going to show up, they're going to help you rebuild. No, they are there to do a criminal investigation. You might get some that are helpful, some other ones, they're just going to collect the evidence and move on. And that's where, like Elaine was mentioning with the cyber insurance, that really comes in handy at that point. Or if you're a state or local government, we have a managed security services that'll come in and it's retainer free. You just have to sign a contract with us. Once again, absolutely free, but if you need it, it's there on standby for you. So
that's all helpful to know. I think one last area of resources that doesn't get a lot of press, it's not all that exciting to talk about, but many state, local, and county governments get inquiries from the press, right? They're in a small town, they know that a ransomware has happened and everybody knows everybody, and of course the reporter is going to call. Are there any resources available at the state level for advising throughout the state how to manage crisis communications during an event?
We have some templates, but like Mike was mentioning earlier, the best way to plan for that is to do a couple tabletops. Bring in your press officer and your legal counsel, especially if your press officer and legal counsel has never been in a situation like that. And if you really need the help, give us a call. We have crafted so many messages and run it by other teams, legal counsels at this point, that we're pretty proficient in it. But yeah, like Mike said, tabletop it, because that way when something happens, you have that template ready and your public information officer knows what to say and your employees know, okay, don't go run to the press and tell them everything.
Exactly. And so there's also some just tiny points, like don't mention, or you have to sometimes run this through the FBI. Like if the FBI was involved and you're about to make an announcement that, the instant investigation is over, the FBI is an excellent resource to provide feedback for what to say and not to say in the press. So I just want to leave these last few minutes available for you. I'm going to just get out of the way. And I know you probably learned something from each other, listening to each other today. And maybe you can actually just talk to each other about what your takeaways are and what you would like to leave behind for those who are attending today regarding a deep dive into what resources that you would go to.
I'll start real fast. If everybody who's watching this can sign up at isao.texas.gov for our mailing lists, just to receive our information, even if it ends up going to, say, your spam folder, if you even read one of them and it helps you, that's a win for me. And then if you can give me feedback on what we can do to make things better, like Mike gives us feedback, hey, you guys could be doing this better. And we've talked to the city of Austin. They've said, hey, you could be doing this for us. If you can give us that feedback, we're always looking to improve.
Okay, brilliant.
I was glad to hear that there's violent agreement about the importance of tabletop preparations. If you look at the public ransomware situations at the city level, large city level, you can pretty quickly tell who had a plan and who didn't. If you're trying to figure out whether or not the ransom should be paid, that's a problem, right? It shouldn't be paid. But if you don't know how you're going to recover in case you can't get the keys back, then that's a problem, and it's preventable. You can anticipate these kinds of things and work through them. So I know that I've kind of mentioned this now about 3 times, but I really do think it's one of the best preventative measures you can take that doesn't cost a ton of money. Doesn't have a SKU. You don't have to order it and rack and stack it. You can just do this.
Plus, it's a brilliant way to see all the warts and pimples of your organization. Everybody believes that everything is fine. You've reached a certain state of maturity, and let's say you got your incident response plan approved by city council or some other governing board just a year ago. And once you tabletop it, you realize the holes. There's like, oh gosh, we forgot to include so-and-so, the press officer, or we forgot to send it out to outside counsel, to make sure the messaging was appropriate for emails, to employees. And what about social media? So I've seen more incident response plan include a pure social media person alone than in the last year than ever before. So we all know that social media can be our friend, but it can also be our enemy. So those are all good points. And Elaine, do you happen to have any takeaway for that you think Texas cities would also say, would agree with?
I would probably just say that it really is imperative that we all work together. Daniel's already, identified we do have, the city of Austin has a good working relationship with DIR, but I think it's imperative from an industry standard standpoint, from a best practices standpoint, just from everybody, kind of lessons learned and, things they've done right and things they've done wrong. And I think we really can all help each other through this new technology and new times that we're dealing with cyber attacks.
I agree with all of your points. I think when we planned this conference back in February, we had no idea we'd be where we are right now in October 2020. And I think by the time we have our next Cyber Summit in 2021, we'll all know a whole lot more. But this has been so helpful. I'm sure I speak for all the people who've attended, who thank you for all of your input and your ideas. And I look forward to growing through this with all of you. So thanks